right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon to you all. Well, I guess it's not quite afternoon just yet, but we're going to continue in our V-Ray and, well, primarily V-Ray today, but Rhino experience. And really today is about evolving what we did last class. So we'll spend a little bit more time with texture mapping. We'll work on our materials to make those a little bit better. And then we're also going to spend time with the environment. And we worked with the sun before, but this time we're going to spend time trying to really figure out and solve what happens if we want a photorealistic background as opposed to an abstract, generic sky background. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and give me a second to get organized. Perfect. And so you'll see that today I have exercise 216 pulled up here, and we're going to work with something called an HDRI. And this HDRI is a high dynamic image. It's a high dynamic range image, and it's specifically designed as a full 360-degree panorama. And that HDRI image has a bunch of extra data in it, such that when V-Ray tries to expose the scene for a particular light setting, it's going to deliberately lighten or darken that background image to give us an approximation of what the sky would look like. So we're going to spend a lot of time working on that today. I'm going to go ahead and open up Rhino, and then I'll open up the file from last class. Remember, we had two pieces. We had our actual skyscraper building in one file, and then we also had our SF downtown city file that we loaded our building into and then did our rendering. Let me get this organized. I'm going to dock in the V-Ray toolbar here. I'm also going to set my rendering engine to be V-Ray for Rhino. So my current render is now V-Ray for Rhino. And then I'll go ahead and go to File and then Open. And I will go into my files from last class, and we're going to open both the skyscraper and the SF downtown file. I'll start with the SF downtown file. This was the file that I was actually doing my rendering in. And then let me open, and I'm just going to double click on it to open it. I'm going to open my skyscraper right here. So we have both files. And I like to have both files open because it lets me kind of bounce between them and then do my updates on them. So let's come on there. There we go. So this was my skyscraper. And if you remember from last class, I had assigned the black glass. Oops, that was in the wrong spot. And we can confirm this. Let me go to V-Ray, or excuse me, my render, current render. I'm just confirming that V-Ray selected yes. Let's go into my V-Ray asset editor. And if we look at my materials, we have glass coated black. That was the material that I chose for the skin of the skyscraper, and that was sufficient for what we were doing. We may evolve that a little bit today. I mentioned that last class, and I'll show you that evolution in just a second. But really, the important part about today is we want to further explore what's happening in the background environment. And so what we had last class, just in review, in our V-Ray asset editor, if we went to settings, we had an environment tab here, and we set our background as an image. So this background has an image assigned to, or excuse me, it's not an image, it is a texture sky, and that sky is set to the sunlight as its generating factor. So it'll give us kind of a gradient. It mimics plus or minus a clear sky. So there's not going to be any clouds. To really enhance the photorealism of this, though, frequently we want to actually use a background that has clouds or sky that was basically a photorealistic background. And those are available as high dynamic range images. Now, high dynamic range images, you want to spend a little bit of time working on them and finding them. You can do a Google search for HDRI background image. And you can look through and find examples of them. I believe that Polyhaven actually has a pretty good collection of them. They also have some texture files, but these HDRIs, we can browse the HDRIs, and they're showing you these kind of panoramic views, and you can see the sky is really nice. Now, some of these are problematic because they have hills in them or they have trees in them. And if we were to use that, the scale is going to get kind of difficult. Though you can use them, there's nothing wrong with using them. They're just going to be a little bit problematic. You know, this rainforest trail, for example, the scale. But we could use it, and maybe I'll download one of those as an example. When we're in a desert type environment where the ground is really flat and there's nothing on the horizon, something like this can actually be very beneficial, and is certainly something that we can use. I have on the course website, I have some that I've already set up here. So this is Digital Tools for Architects. .com, and I should have logged in ahead of time. I apologize. I'm going to need my password here. There we go. Sorry. Perfect. And if we go to the home page here, under resources, we have something called V-Ray quick rendering setups. And so these are the ones that I use. And I also have a bunch of the settings already set up for us. So these can be beneficial. The HDRIs are not my originals. They can be downloaded from this person's website. Bob Grothius creates these. He does an absolutely fantastic job doing it. I would recommend spending some time and actually downloading some of them. He offers a lot of them for free, which is great. And you can get into, let's see here, Dutch free 360s. And these are all ones that he has that are for free. And you can download those. Some of those, like this 006, for example, match up with the one that I have on my website here, Scene 006. And I've taken some time and actually written out a bunch of information that can help us sort this out. Okay, because we understand where the original photo was taken, etc., and that'll help us line up this this file. So that's there for your benefit. You can go to his website and you can download them for free. I think you actually end up clicking on it and saying, yes, I'm going to pay for it, but it ends up being a cost of €0. And they might ask for some information, etc. Again, we're staying away from ones that have trees in them, like those, and we want ones that are primarily just a nice sky background. Okay, so I'm going to use that 006 as our example today, this one here. If you want to directly download it from the course website, you can right here, or better yet, go ahead and purchase it for free so that he knows that you're supporting his website, etc., which would be right here. There you go. And so you can add it to the cart. Like I said, it's free, so it's no harm in doing that. Okay, so this is the version that I'm going to use. So what do we need in order to make this really work? Well, first off, it's helpful if we understand basic information about when the photo was taken, where it was taken, etc. I believe in his file that you download, and let's go ahead and open that up. I do have all of these on my flash drive. So let me go in here. I have my resources folder. I have a folder called V-Ray, and lo and behold, I have a V-Ray HDRI folder. I've separated them out into day, night, and sunsets. Here's 006, and they frequently have a little bit of information about it. So here we are, right? And so here's the accurate location, and then I've added a little bit more because of the final project where you might be using it. So I have some extra little bits there. But he includes this initial information. So he includes a latitude and a longitude, a date, a time, what they call an horizontal rotation. That's to compensate for where north is, and a height off the ground, should that be necessary. We don't really use the height, but we are going to use the rest of this information to kind of set things up. So if we're using the accurate location information, we would be putting this information in as we started to create our background image. So let's go through with that information. So I'm going to jump back into our scene. And the first piece that we need is we need to actually load that HDRI into the background of this image. So I'm going to open the V-Ray asset editor. And I'm going to go back to my settings. And in the environment here, I'm going to go ahead and clear that again. So I'll right click on it and I'll say clear. And then for the background, I'm going to bring in that HDRI image. So instead of choosing sky, like we did last time, I'm going to choose bitmap. So with bitmap selected, I need to go to my flash drive or my OneDrive folder. I'm going to go into my resources, go into V-Ray, V-Ray HDRI, day 006, and there we are. Now there are two files. There's one that is a reference file, _ref, and one that is an _env. This env we're going to use for global illumination. The ref file is what we need for our background image. So I'm going to go ahead and select open. And if we did it correctly, we should see a nice version of it right here. Now, if I jump back and I look at that notepad that was opened, right, we have a latitude and a longitude, we have a date, we have a time, but there's also this north H rotation of 0.92. So we need to figure out where that goes, and we're going to do that in our texture placement. And notice we have a rotate H. So this rotate H would be a 0.92. And so we type that value in, and it just slightly rotates to compensate for where north would be. Okay, the rest of the options are all set up by default, so that's perfect. So we now have a bitmap. That then will render out as our background in here. What doesn't match up currently is where our sun would be. So we had a sun that we inserted into the machine, into the system here, but that sun right here, which is right here, was just completely arbitrary. So we're going to turn off that sun, and we're going to create a new layer, and I'll call this one Sun 2. And this new Sun 2 layer, we'll make that active. We need to establish a new sun that matches up with our background image. So let me go ahead and go to the sun creation panel. And so this time, remember last time we came down here and we just searched for San Francisco? We have a latitude and a longitude. So we need to copy those values in from our file. So there's our latitude. So we'll go ahead and copy it. I'll come back to Rhino. And I'll paste this right in here. There it is. Now I need to go to my longitude. So let's go back to my little notepad. And there it is. We'll right click and copy. Come back to Rhino. And we'll put in our longitude. And so that gives us exactly where he took the photo. Okay, so I have that set up. Then we'll scroll back up to our date and time. So let's go back to our notepad. It was taken in 2011 on 7/1, and our time was 1440. So I'll copy the time here, and I can remember 7/1 of 2011. So we'll come back here. This is 2011. Oops. And this was 7/1, and the time was 14:40:00. So I've set the date and time to match up with what they said, and then I'll go ahead and say okay, and then I can insert my new sun into the scene. So let me turn on my end snap so I can snap it. I'm going to snap it to a different corner just so we can see it differently. There's my new sun. I can then turn off the old sun because we only want to have one sun in the scene at a time. And now that matches up to my background. So if you remember from last time with our renderings, if I go back to my settings, we set a render output so that it was narrow but tall, so we'd get the whole building. I have my background set. The only thing I don't have yet is something called global illumination. And this isn't so important when we're doing a generic sky, but when we have things like clouds in the sky, those clouds naturally reflect sun. And so there's some additional light that's bounced around a particular scene. So this global illumination, this GI value, adds to the realism of the scene. So we're going to check that GI to turn it on. And then we're going to click the checkerboard pattern again. And we will again add a bitmap file. But instead of picking the reference file, we're going to pick the ENV file. If the download of the HDRI does not come with an ENV file, that's okay. You can use the reference file again, but the ENV is a little bit better. What it is it's a blurry version of the reference file. They're very, very similar, and you'll see it there. There it is, blurry. Just like we did before, under texture placement, I need to change the horizontal rotation to 0.92. And the rest of the options are all just fine. And so with those set now, we can jump back. We have a global illumination. Let me go back to my settings here. Right? We have a global illumination set. There it is. We have a background set. I'm going to jump this background back up to 1. We may have to adjust that as we do test renderings. So now it's time to go ahead and do a test rendering. Before I do it, however, I'm going to go ahead and choose File, Save to make sure that I'm saving it. And then we'll go ahead and click on the Render button. And I'm sorry that this takes time and that there's gaps during this process, but we have to actually render it out because we have to see what it's going to look like. So we'll let it compile its geometry here. And there we go. So we can see immediately that the sky is too dark. We can see some clouds in the sky, so that's good, but the sky is definitely too dark. So let's go ahead and stop this rendering. And then we're going to need to brighten the sky. So like I said, under the environment here, the background, this value, the higher we make this value, the lighter the sky becomes. So I might jump that up to maybe 10, and we'll see what happens. Now, that being said, I have my reference files over here on my quick rendering setups, and chances are I have an exposure value of 14, there it is, and do I have a background value right there? I was guessing I probably had it, of 30. So I'm going to save myself a little bit of trouble, and I'm going to check with my exposure value and my background value before I actually do the rendering. So let me jump back into V-Ray here. We'll set this background value to 30. And let's go in and check my exposure value. That's under my camera settings. And we'll exposure value at 14. And then we'll go ahead and render again. So I'll click on the teapot to start the next render. And then we'll be patient for a little bit while it starts to build out the render. And there we go. And so you can see that the sky is much better than it was. I know this is a little bit blurry, but if I zoom in, you can see that the clouds are actually in the sky. So it's a far more realistic render. Furthermore, the reflection on the building, right, now shows the clouds. And that really helps with the overall realism of one of these renderings. Now, obviously, this is not trying to be photorealistic because our background is all generic massing, but it kind of enhances the rendering of the building itself. So at this point, once I have the settings correct, I might be happy and go ahead and start the, I could actually do a final rendering of it. So as I said before, I do have an adapted for San Francisco settings. So I could set my location to San Francisco. I could set my date and my time a little bit different, my horizontal rotation a little bit different, and this would give me the same results. It doesn't matter whether I use this set or this set, the positioning is going to end up being the same. I did this so that when you're doing renderings, you can set it in San Francisco, or you can set it in Lake Tahoe during the final project. So you can use those. The advantage there is that then you can set the date and time, if you wanted to, more of a California time as opposed to somewhere in Europe. So just different settings, but of course we can use our settings that came down with the file. So what if we get a file and that file doesn't have settings? Well, we can approximate this information. And for this purpose, and this is again an illustration for you, not something that you need to do as part of today's work, because you can use the information that comes with it. But if I were to open a new Rhino here, and in the process, let's look at, right, I'm going to use this HDRI. I don't know anything about this HDRI. I've never worked with it before. I'm going to go ahead and download it. So let's click the download button. Hopefully it won't make me sign up. There we go. Let's look. Okay, it only gave me the sunset and the 4K version of an EXR file. So I have no other information. I don't know whether, oh, they do have two different formats. We'll try, I'm going to switch it over to the HDR, and let's bump it up in resolution a bit, and we'll go ahead and download that. There it is, .hdr. And let me just see if there's anything. All right, so there's no information about this. So as I start to use this, I'm going to have to figure it out. This one's a little bit complicated because it's at sunset. So maybe I should pick a different one so that you can see this process. Hold on.
Can't you use your own picture?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm asking if you can use your own picture that you took. You know, we can.
If it is a full spherical panorama that's been done as an HDRI. So if you were doing that, it's a combination of a full 360 that's shot with each image 3 times, deliberately under and overexposed, and then they're all crammed into one picture. So it's a lot of data.
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
Yes, you could, but it's going to take some effort.
But no.
Yeah, yes, you could, but probably not. Exactly. Okay, so this one actually has a sun in the sky. So this is a better one for me to use as an example. So let me keep it with the 16K HDR. I'm going to go ahead and download that file. And there it is. Okay, so in my brand new Rhino file here, let me close this. And again, I'm setting this one up artificially so that you can kind of see how it's going to work here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a V-Ray infinite plane. Oh, I need my units to be correct. Let me go to File and then New. To large object inches. I'll try this one more time. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to add a V-Ray infinite plane. There it is. I'm going to add a box in the center just so we can kind of see this here. Let's say at 4 feet, 4 feet. And we'll make it, 8 feet tall. There we go, just so that we have some sense of what scale is. Obviously, we want to see the horizon, so I'm going to tip this down as we start to do our rendering. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Okay, so this is just a quick scene setup. But if I'm going to load in that file that we just downloaded, so it's this file as an HDRI, I can go ahead and bring it in. But again, I don't know any information about my sun just yet. So let's go ahead and bring that one in, setting up our render. So I'll go into my V-Ray asset editor. I'm going to go into my settings, and I'm going to go into my environment here. And under background, we'll right click on the checkerboard and we'll say clear. Then I'll go ahead and click on the checkerboard again. I'll go to bitmap, and I'm going to load in that one that I just downloaded. So it was this one. And we'll go ahead and say open. And hopefully, let's open our drawer to the right here. I'd feel better if I saw a preview. I'm not seeing it. There it is. Okay, perfect. So we have that loaded in. So if I were to actually do the render, I'm going to have to set up some settings here. Let's go into our camera, and we're going to guess. I'm going to guess this is about 14. And if I were to do a render right now, we have no idea where the sun would go. Actually, the sun isn't even in the scene yet. So in order to try to figure that out, the best strategy is actually to use a sphere. And so if you remember back to like maybe when you were growing up, some of your neighbors might have had those lawn ornaments where they had like a polished chrome sphere sitting in their front yard. Well, that's essentially what we're creating. So I'm just going to create a sphere. The size doesn't really matter. I want to make sure that it's moved up above the ground plane, so it's sitting up above the ground. Like that. I'm going to hide this cube for right now. And then I'm going to look at this in the top view. So let me look at the top view. I'll go to my shaded mode just so you can kind of see it. There it is. And what I'll do is I'll guess at a sun. So I'll come in here and I'll go to my sun creation panel. And since we're working in San Francisco, I'll go ahead and pick San Francisco. There it is. There's San Francisco. Then I'll pick a date and time. We'll use today's date and we'll do a time in the afternoon. We'll say something like 3 in the afternoon. Again, I'm just guessing. I'll go ahead and say okay, and then I'll drop the sun into the scene. There it is. So then in the top view, if I assign this a chrome sphere, so I need a material. Let's open up here into the materials. Let's go to metal, and we should have a aluminum polish. Let's see, chrome polish. There we go. I'll right click and say apply to selection. And so now in the top view, I'm not doing it in the perspective view. If I do it in the top view and I start a render, I don't know for sure that my light settings are going to be quite right. Well, they're not too bad. Obviously the sky is way too dark. What I'm seeing is I'm seeing a reflection of the V-Ray sun that I just created and a shadow of that sun. But then I'm also seeing a reflection of where the sun is in my HDRI. So they're not matching up. Right? This sun is in a very different position. The time of day isn't bad, but I need to swing the sun all the way around there, or I need to swing the HDRI, one or the other. So let's make a few adjustments so that you can see this a little bit better. I'm going to open my V-Ray asset editor. We'll go back to our settings. I'm going to go into my environment, and we're going to bump this up. Let's try it at about 30. And let's render it again. All right, now we're seeing that sky a little bit better, and we can see those two not quite lining up. So we have two different choices. One, we can try to modify the date and or the time to get our sun to match, or we can modify the background and rotate the background around. Either one will work, but let's try it first to see if we can modify the date. So right now we were in October. If I go back, let's minimize these for a second. I'll select my light, and then I need to modify that light setting. So I'm going to go into my properties here, and I'm going to edit. Sorry, you can't really see that because it's pulled off the side. We're going to edit in the V-Ray asset editor. Here is, why is it not letting me edit it there? Let's go ahead and with it selected, let's go back to the sun creation panel. We might just have to create it again. No, we don't. We're back here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the time of year, which is going to pull this around. And you can kind of see in my sun angle calculator, the sun position, this is going to help. Remember, our sun was up over here right now. So, right, I could adjust this, but I'm never really getting there. And that's probably because this image was taken, and I didn't pay attention, probably in the southern hemisphere rather than in the northern hemisphere. So no matter how much I change this, if I'm using San Francisco as my guide, I can't get the sun to swing all the way around. So what I can do, though, is I could go back. Let's hit cancel. Actually, let's go back to today. I'm going to change my time to be more in the morning. Well, right about there, we'll say, okay, that's going to move my, oh, I'm going to have to delete the old one. There's the new one. Let's delete the old one. And then I'm going to go back into my V-Ray asset editor. I'm going to go to my environment right here, my background, and I'm going to change that H rotation. And I'll rotate this H by 180. So it should flip all the way around. And then we'll do another test render. And let's take a look. So that sun should move. It should be down here now. Oops, sorry, wrong view to render in. Stop, render. And there it is. And so if we look at these two, and again, I was guessing a little bit, but we're really close to where those two line up. For the purposes of our rendering, it's probably close enough. Could I tweak it just a little bit? Sure. I could go back in and adjust the sun settings. But these are close enough now to actually really kind of work. So if in this file, if I've created a sun that I like, and I've created the background and I understand what it is, I can save those settings and bring them over into my other file if I wanted to. And I can do that by coming over here into my settings and then clicking on the save icon. And then I could actually save this as a particular set of sun settings, whatever it is. I don't even know what to call this. This would be a clear sky sun. And it's going to save a VR opt file. You can go ahead and click on save. And then in my file here, I could load that same setting. So if I went to my settings and I went to this folder, I could then go get this clear sky sun, and lo and behold, I'd be able to open it. So you can actually move settings from one to the other. I always think it's a good idea, once you've identified your settings and you've got them the way you like, to go ahead and write them down. So that's where my V-Ray quick rendering setups are. I basically labeled all this stuff and I've said what the time would be, what the date would be, what the rotation would be, etc., so that you could recreate it if you want. So I just physically write it down. That's how you would go about starting from an image like this one that you don't know any information about. The Bob Grotius ones, luckily, have a lot of information built into the file, so you could just go with that information. So what I'm going to ask you to do today is I'm going to ask you to load an HDRI background and then create a sun in your SF downtown scene. It's not that much work in Rhino. What it is it's a lot of work of going and finding an HDRI, downloading it, and finding the information, figuring out where to put it in. So it's more about where do you manipulate, where do you put the information in, than it is about actually doing too much creative work. If you want to do my method where you create a separate file like this, and you do the rendering and you test it out and you figure out what the time of day and the year should be, there's nothing wrong with that either. So you can absolutely do that, and that would let you get it from the Polyhaven website instead of the Bob Grotius website. So I have those set up in my SF downtown scene. What I haven't adjusted yet is the texture mapping for my skyscraper. So let's go back and open that one up. So here's my skyscraper. Like I said, I used the glass black coated right there, the glass coated black, sorry, I should say it correctly, to create my skin of this building. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with using that. But in reality, there might be a different option that's out there that might work a little bit better. When I did the final rendering, you saw a little bit of the floors peeking through the sides, and that kind of worked for me as a look. But I also created a while back a material that's available here that is the skyscraper glass dark and the skyscraper glass light. Both of those materials can work really nicely for your skyscraper. So I'm going to right click. I'll do the light one first. I'm going to save link as, and of course I have these already on my flash drive, but we'll save them here into my downloads folder. I'm going to go ahead and click on keep. Now I would make sure that you save the, oops, it looks like I have to click on it. It takes you to the web page. I apologize. So there's an example of what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it here and say save link as. And I'm going to save it on my downloads folder, but you should save it in your resources folder, because if you go to open the file again and you don't have it in your downloads folder, it'll get confused as to where the material is. So let's save that. It's going to download it as a zip file. Let's keep it. So I'm going to need to show it in a folder and then actually extract it. So it's still downloading, I think. There it is. And I'm going to need to extract it before I can use it. So I'll right click and say extract all, and then extract. And there it is. You can ignore the Mac file. That's a holdover because I created the zip file on the Mac. And we can look at this material. So I have some samples of what it looks like. I do have the ability to actually load it, the VR matte file. And I also have a transparency mask. And there's another transparency mask here, depending on your look. So let's go ahead and let's load that in. We're going to be looking for the VR mat file, this file in Rhino. So I'm going to come back into my Skyscraper file, and I'm going to, in my materials here, I'm going to load an asset. So I'm going to click down here on the folder icon, and I'm looking for VR mat file. Well, it's in here. If you're not seeing this, it's because you haven't extracted the zip file. That's a critical component. I'll go ahead, and it's going to give me this glass skyscraper light. And there it is. Now, there may be a few pieces that are missing. And so let's look at the opacity, for example. Let's look at this little texture slot, and let's see if it's, let's see if it's actually showing. So I'm not sure. It may or may not be. I'm going to go ahead and clear it and load it in again. I'll click on it again. I'll go to bitmap, and it's this one. And the reason that I'm using this one is because the upper has a little bit of transparency, but the lower is kind of opaque. And that's going to mimic the skyscraper a little bit better because it's going to be more solid in the in-between floors and more transparent in the building itself. And if you go look at a building, frequently you'll see this subtle difference in the glass facade as it goes up. So I already have that loaded in. That's going to be under my piece, and you can see a little bit of it there. Like that. We'll have a look. It's possible that I might have to invert it. So I might have to come in here and invert the texture. I don't remember which way it goes. Let's go back now. Yeah, I think that's better. So I needed to invert the texture. So now I can go ahead and I can apply it to my building. So I'll select the skin of the building. So let's go over here. I can apply it to the skin layer. So I'm going to right click on the glass skyscraper light. I'm going to apply to layer and then skin. But in order for this to really look good, I do need to do some texture mapping. And so this is designed to work around a 4-foot by 4-foot by 16-foot module, which is essentially what one floor would be on our building. So unlike the glass coated black, where we didn't have to do any texture mapping, this one we're going to have to. So I'm going to go ahead and select my skin, and I'm doing this from the skin layer. It'll make my life a little bit easier. So I right click and say select objects. That'll select all of the skin. And then I'm going to go into my properties. I'll go to my texture mapping, and I'm going to create a bounding or a box. So we'll do a bounding box map. We'll do world. We'll go ahead and cap it, and there it is. At that point, I will show my mapping. So we'll click on the show mapping widget, and there it is. Notice I did it for all of the skin at once. Now this bounding box is the full size of the building. I'm going to do some scales. Sorry, I'm going to have to sneeze. Sorry about that. Came out of nowhere. I'm going to go ahead and do some scales. I'm going to do a scale 1D just because it makes, sorry, I have to click in my command line. It lets me kind of control as I'm scaling. I'm going to make sure that I can snap to end. And the first thing that I'll do is I'll scale the height. So I'll take this full height, and I'm going to scale this down to be 16 feet, which is the floor-to-floor height. Then I'm going to scale each side to be 4 feet. So let's zoom in here. We'll repeat, right-click to repeat, and I'll scale this side to be 4 feet. And then I'll scale this side to be 4 feet. Now this works better with a rectangular building than it does with a really circular curving building. So that is one caveat. Then I'll go ahead and take this texture map right there, and I'm going to move it so that it snaps to the first floor right there of my building. And if I did it right, it should basically fill up that first, the space in between the floors and then the first floor. It's hard to see this because of the transparency in its final version, but we can go ahead at this point and save it. I'll go to File and then Save. We can jump back over into my SF Skyscraper view. There it is. And we could then load it in. So we'll go into my Edit. We'll go to Blocks and then Block Manager. And not sure why this isn't linked. Let's go ahead and go into my properties to make sure it's linked correctly. And let's make sure it's the fall skyscraper fall of 2022. Go ahead and say open. We'll go ahead and say okay. No idea why that wasn't correct. There it is. Now it's up to date. We can close it. And now we can do a new render of this building. I'm going to confirm, because I had trouble with my materials last class, that it did bring in my glass skyscraper light. It did. And if I looked at my layers here under skin, it should be glass skyscraper light. Perfect. And then we can go ahead and do the render. Let me move this over just a little bit, just to confirm. Yep. So let's go ahead and do that render. Again, it's small. You can see what the version with the black coated glass was. Let's go ahead and render it again. And this should be a little bit lighter this time. Probably should have saved my file first. And there we go. We see it start to render out. And obviously this is a much lighter material. It should still be reflecting. And we're seeing some more banding. So it's just a different look. And if it's something that you're interested in doing, you can, of course, go that direction. The dark skyscraper is very, very similar to the light skyscraper. So if I were to click on that, it's actually closer to the black coated glass, but it's a much darker building. So just a subtle difference. Let's go ahead and go back to my SF downtown here. And now it's starting to continue that rendering process. So it's a little bit different look. If it's something that you're interested in doing, you can use that. Otherwise, you could, of course, use the glass coated black. That would be just fine. The key here is to kind of finalize any texture mapping issues that you might have. There it is from a little bit further away. And what we're really looking for is that HDRI, the cloudy sky background. That's what I want to see as part of your turn-in for today. So like I said, today wasn't that long, but it's a lot of little details to pay attention to and to kind of think through and to be prepared and figure out where the options are. So I'll be around during our check-ins today. Remember, if you didn't come on Monday's check-in, please come to today's check-in. And these are the kinds of things where people frequently have questions or problems or whatever, and they want to go through what's happening and why it's happening, etc. So all of that being said, I also want to tell you guys that there is a possibility that I won't have class. I'll cancel class on Monday. I won't know about that until tomorrow or maybe Friday at the latest. I will send an email to everyone, and I'll also send a message to everyone to confirm. As of right now, class is on, but I'm just warning everybody that I may be canceling it for next Monday only. Okay, so just throwing it out there. Like to give you guys notice if I can, but I'll find out at the latest on Friday whether I end up having to cancel or not. Okay, so if you have any questions, you're of course welcome to come to check-ins today, or if you have global questions you want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk about that. Let's come back at about 12:15 or so for our first check-in group, and you guys are free to go.